Sometimes what will happen is we get triggered and we go outside of our window of tolerance, which means it's really hard for us to get back to that kind of optimal middle zone where we want to be. So again, through therapy, what we're looking at is actually how can we sort of slowly build your capacity to oscillate through that space? How can we create safe ways for you to feel angry or safe ways for you to feel sadness? And how can we slowly over time expand that window of tolerance? So make that sort of comfort zone that you have a little bit bigger so that we can cope with stress better. Again, when we have trauma, what we see is that window shrinks. So that's another way of describing it.
I think what also happens when that window shrinks, in response to that, we have to shrink our world.
Absolutely.
We have to minimize the relationships or the stress from work. We make our world smaller to try and stay in our window of tolerance. And again, there comes that point where people are like, okay, I've made my world as small as I possibly can and I'm still struggling and I'm not able to do the things that I want to do and have the relationships that I want to have. Without this language, they're essentially saying, I need my window of tolerance to be broader so I can actually live the life that I want to live.
Absolutely.
My guest today is Giorgia Deslandes, a counsellor and psychotherapist based in Melbourne, whose work centres around supporting people healing from complex trauma. Giorgia takes an integrative, deeply compassionate approach to therapy, bringing in somatic practices, mindfulness, and a range of evidence-based therapies to help clients reconnect with their inner strength and capacity for healing. In this episode, we talk about how complex trauma can shape our development, how therapy can support the nervous system to feel safe again, and what healing might actually look like and feel like over time. You're listening to The Right Therapist, where we demystify therapy. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and work. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Welcome, Giorgia.
Thank you so much for having me.
No worries at all. I'm really curious about your work in general. And I'm interested in how you came to this work.
Yes. So I think like a lot of us who are drawn to this work, I do have my own lived experience of complex trauma, help seeking, mental health, all of those sorts of things. And I was very, very fortunate through that sort of process to encounter some amazing people and some amazing therapists who honestly changed my life. And in some ways, it's not that I feel like I have a duty to do that for others, but more it's just such a beautiful, privileged space to work in. And in some ways, it feels a bit like the passing of the baton. Do you know what I mean? It's this beautiful kind of connected process. So other than that, I've always been very, very interested in people, in what makes us who we are, and I guess the mechanisms of our experience. So yeah, I'm so lucky to do the work that I do, and I absolutely love it. So yeah.
Those amazing therapists that you saw.
Yes.
Just off the top of your head, what was good about them? What was it that was amazing?
Oh, there's so many things. I think the biggest one is they very much empowered me to sort of come to realizations or resolutions myself. So it was very much they were facilitating me doing the work as opposed to necessarily doing the work for me or even indulging my story sometimes, which was hard at first. And I definitely had a lot of resistance to that process. But it's ultimately, I guess, given me access to a sense of self that I think was always there, but just I had become a little bit obscured by the bullshit, to be honest. So I think a lot of it was around, giving me the skills in order to sort of navigate that, believing in me, giving me sort of a bit of that tough love when I needed it, and also integrating a beautiful sort of spiritual approach to the work, which has become very, very integral, not only to my life but also my practice. So, yeah.
That's really beautiful. Can you say a bit about your work and how you work with people, who you work with and how you work with them?
Yep. So it's a great question. It's going to take a minute to think about this.
It's a big question.
So in terms of, I guess, the clients that I work with, I do tend to work with a pretty large demographic. So I've done lots of different things over the last couple of years. So worked with adults, worked with families, worked with couples, worked with kids, adolescents. I would say now my practice very much centers around probably more the client's experience as opposed to a specific demographic. So often it is working with people who've had that experience of particularly complex and developmental trauma. So the last few years in particular, I've been spent working in the family violence community sector. So I do still see a lot of those clients, and I love working with women in particular as well, who've been through those sorts of experiences. And also, kids and young people as well. In terms of, I guess, how I work, that is a very beautiful and broad question. I think the things that I try to come back to is being very, person-centered, strengths-based, integrative in my approach. So I really like to sort of tailor what we're doing in collaboration with the person who's in front of me. So it's not necessarily that I'll go into a session with a really strict, process around what we're going to do. I like to sort of work in a really flexible way and sort of have fun with it and explore what's going to work best for that client. I am very integrative in the work that I do, and I utilize a lot of evidence-based modalities, but a lot of them do stem from that sort of trauma space. So I do a bit of a mix of what we call bottom-up and top-down approaches. Can
you say a little bit about what that means, bottom up or top down?
Yes, absolutely. So a top-down approach is, I guess, what you would call your typical talk therapy. So it tends to work with, cognition and our sort of intellectual narratives about ourselves and our experience. And it's super important and it's really effectual. But what we're sort of learning as like the research in the trauma space evolves is that it's kind of only one piece of the puzzle. And often what will happen is when we don't include, I guess, the body and the visceral experience of what that person has been through, that experience will tend to override any kind of intellectual understanding we might have. So, for example, I've got a lot of clients who'll say, like, I know logically it wasn't my fault. I know that like up here, but in my heart, there's just this part of me that still feels that. So I'm left with this imprint, or this somatic echo is a word we would use to describe that, which is almost that sort of visceral emotion or activation that's happened in the body as a result of the trauma. So that is why when we work with kind of both of those things, so that top-down and bottom-up approach, it tends to kind of be the most effective in that we're sort of looking at it in a really holistic way. So just to be a little bit more specific as well, so with those bottom-up approaches, what that essentially means is we're working very much with the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and the body. And the way that looks can be very different, but there's lots of different ways to integrate those sorts of approaches. So I think particularly for me, the things that I come back to in my practice are a beautiful therapy called somatic experiencing, which was pioneered by Dan Siegel, who is a beautiful figure in the somatic trauma space. And other therapies as well, such as sensory motor psychotherapy by Pat Ogden, and somatic psychology in general, which sort of encapsulates a lot of different things. I also have recently started integrating EMDR as well, which has been awesome. But I guess the similarities between all of those things, it's very much working with what we will call the implicit memory system. So when we experience something that is very overwhelming for us, which we would typically classify as something that is traumatic, so something that essentially, overwhelms our system's capacity to cope, we will often kind of encode that memory in a way that is maladaptive or sort of dysfunctional. So what that means is essentially when we're in that state of overwhelm, when we're in that survival response, that fight or flight, that feeling of anxiety or dissociation or whatever it might be, our memory process becomes disrupted. And so what happens is the way that memory is stored in the brain is different. It kind of becomes a bit isolated and stuck and fragmented. And so what happens is a lot of clients will come in and say, I can recall what happened to me. For example, I can recall that, I was in the car and then the car accident happened and I heard the wheels screeching and all of these sorts of things. So they have this kind of linear, explicit understanding of what's gone on. But there's also this underlying, what we call implicit timeline, which is where, even though intellectually they're saying to me, I know that this happened, in the past. I know this is not happening now. But every time I get in the car, I'm having this overwhelming anxiety that I can't put my finger on, or I'm having a panic attack, or I'm noticing that I'm, really, really, really scared and I can't move and I'm stuck. So that right there is what we're talking about when we're describing implicit memory. So that is very much what those body-based approaches are sort of trying to address and complete. So the other thing I really like to talk about is it's not about fixing it. We're not here to try and stop the response. We're here to try and find a beautiful adaptive way to process and complete the response that the client was not able to in the moment.
And
Yes.
are you saying that in the moment, because they were in such a state of stress, for example, in a car accident, that they couldn't process that and store that memory in a way where it's kind of completed and that event is now over?
Yes.
And that keeps coming up for them in environments that trigger it or might be somewhat similar?
Yes, definitely. So a classic example that we often talk about is war veterans who have PTSD or have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And it might be a situation where that person has experienced significant combat trauma. And let's say it's 20 years later, he is on a date with his partner, he's walking down the street and a car backfires. And all of a sudden, he's like on the ground, he's freaking out, he's got his hands over his head, and his partner's going, what is going on here? Like, I don't understand this response. And I guess what we now understand about that is when we experience a trigger, so for example, the car backfiring that sounds like a gunshot, our nervous system and our brain and our body responds to that trigger as if it were the initial trauma. So when we are activated, when we are in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, faint response, we cannot tell the difference between the past and the present. So if I were to explain that, essentially what happens is when we experience a trigger, there's a central area of our brain called the limbic system. And in the limbic system lives this very key player called the amygdala, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And basically what happens is that amygdala is almost like a bit of a warning system in the brain, right? So we're receiving information, the amygdala goes, oh, okay, this could potentially be quite threatening. And what happens is it kind of sounds an alarm and the whole system mobilizes in order to face the threat. And through doing that, what actually happens is our brains are very clever, and it's almost like they divert all of their energy into the most efficient way to respond to this immediate danger. But what that also means is we actually lose access to very key parts of the brain, first and foremost our prefrontal cortex. So what that means is that prefrontal cortex is responsible for, our impulse control, our sense of language, our rational thinking processes, our executive function, our sense of time is a really key one. So again, keeping in mind, we've lost access to that. So it's not a matter of me rationally or logically being able to hear what you're saying or understand the difference. It's the fact that in that moment, I don't have access to that information or that perception. So that is why often we will see people when they are in that state, you can say, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, you might be saying things to them or you might be trying to calm them down and it's just like hitting a brick wall. It's like nothing's going in, because until they're able to regulate that physiological response and get that sort of prefrontal cortex back online, it's not a matter of I want to hear you, it's a matter of I actually can't. So I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And so When someone is experiencing this in their life, and, often I talk to people when I'm doing intake and they're saying I'm having panic attacks, or I'm getting really stressed, or I'm anxious in particular situations, and it doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why. Like, I know I'm fine. I just don't know why. I completely freak out when I have to do a presentation at work, or when I get in the car, or whatever it might be. And it doesn't make sense in their logical mind, but their body is telling a very different story, and it's scary for them and overwhelming. So if someone comes to therapy with you, or a trauma-informed therapist, what are you aiming to do with them? What are you aiming to facilitate?
Yeah. So a key word when we're talking about trauma therapy is integration. Now, a lot of people will say, what the hell does that actually mean? Which is a great question. But basically what we're wanting to do is essentially take that experience and take that, as I said, that activation, that implicit sense of panic or dread, and we want to find a way for that response to almost complete or move through, so that the client can then kind of get those prefrontal areas of the brain back online and go, hang on a minute. If I was to just take a step back and think about this, I understand now that I'm not actually back there. I'm not in the situation. I'm here. I'm in the present. I am safe. So a lot of trauma therapy is aimed on helping clients to get to the point where they can say, I understand that happened to me. I understand that it happened in the past, and I understand that I'm safe and I'm okay now. So what that looks like, I guess, in terms of a more clinical framework is often we will utilize, I think it was Judith Herman's 3-phase trauma treatment model, which you may have heard of. So basically what that is it's pretty simple. So the first kind of stage is focus on what we call safety and stabilization. So that's, hey, here are all my trauma symptoms. I'm experiencing X, Y, and Z, and it's really debilitating and it's impacting my daily functioning. So the first thing we want to do is find ways for the client to be able to manage and hopefully reduce the acuity of those responses, and also develop what we call a flexible stress response. So often when people have experienced chronic trauma, and particularly complex trauma, which I'm sure we will define soon, is they will, develop what we call a sensitized or an overreactive stress response, right? So another example that I will use is, even let's say you're a little kid and your parents are often in conflict, right? And you come home from school and you open the front door, and it's not necessarily that you're expecting there to be conflict. It's that you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if it's going to be a good day or a bad day. So you're constantly almost like monitoring the environment for this threat that may or may not present itself. So it's this idea that we're constantly on edge. We're constantly in this sort of semi-state of mobilization all the time, because we have to be when we're in that moment, right? It serves us. It helps us to get through the situation. But what happens is, because as I said, when we are triggered later on, the brain struggles to contextualize that experience as something that happened in the past. We still get stuck in those kind of chronic patterns of activation. So
if you experienced that as a child, it would make sense that you might still, even though you're not in that house with conflict anymore, that you might just carry that heightened level of alertness all the time, which can feel like can be anxiety, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And often I think the thing that's really hard is we go into adulthood and we're kind of carrying these these patterns of responding to stress, and we go, something's wrong with me. Like, why am I so anxious, or why am I so depressed, or why am I so, angry, or whatever it might be. And I think a beautiful thing about working with trauma is shifting that lens and reframing that sort of self-blame to say, well, actually, the reason that this is happening is because things happened to you in the past that in a way required that of you. It's actually a very adaptive response. But what we want to do now is go, okay, is this serving me now in this context? Is it in alignment with my values and who I want to be? And is it something that I feel is, beneficial to me? So
that's kind of the point when people come to therapy, isn't it? When they're like, Okay, I've been kind of going along. I got through my teenage years. That might be a whole other story. And then sometime in what I kind of find, and this is just in my own experience of working with clients and doing intake with a lot of people, is that sometime in the 20s and 30s and or maybe even later, people are finding how I adapted and how I've been functioning in this next phase of my life. It's not working. It's getting in the way. I can't do my job properly, or my relationships are more difficult than I think they should be. And while I made the adjustments I needed to make back then and I kind of got through okay, I'm coming to this point where I feel like I can't go forward with what's happening internally here.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's a really hard place to be, because it's almost like you're in this limbo where it's like what was working for me is not working, but I don't know where to go next. Yeah. And I'm also sort of trying to hold it together still and do all of these things that I'm used to being able to do, with not a lot of validation from the outside, because, a lot of people may not have understanding of how these events and things can impact us, but also I think the shame that comes as a result of judging ourselves for that. We go, oh my gosh, like why am I doing this? Why am I back
can
here
other
again?
people easily say no? Or why does someone else not get completely freaked out in this situation? What's wrong with me? Why am I like this?
Totally. Yeah.
And can you say a bit more about it? The flexible stress response that you mentioned before.
Yep, I can. So basically when we're kind of growing up in that environment, or we've had experiences that have led us to kind of have this really hypervigilant or turbo stress response, what can happen is we can kind of get stuck. So I don't know if you've realized, so what happens is our baseline kind of shifts a little bit. So rather than being kind of like, okay, my like MO is to kind of be in this pretty comfortable open space where I can interact with you pretty comfortably and I've got room to move if I need to. So I might still get frustrated. I might still get upset, but I kind of have this capacity to be able to bring myself back to baseline, by, using tools I might have, or having a little bit of a moment of self-compassion or whatever it might be that I need to do. But what can happen again when there's been kind of chronic trauma or complex trauma is that response becomes very kind of stuck and rigid. So sometimes I'll explain it like a pinball machine, right? So it's almost like bang, 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 bang. So we might get really stuck up in this kind of sense of being constantly anxious and constantly on edge or really angry or whatever. So that baseline is sort of shifted to up here. So what that means is then if I experience something that's stressful or triggering, rather than me going from say 50 to 100, I'm going to go to 100 to 150. Does that make sense? So I'm very reactive. So essentially, if we were to look at it objectively, it might seem like from the outside that the reaction is disproportionate to the stimulus. And not only that, it's impossible or very difficult for me to then come back down, come back out of that sort of state. And vice versa, same with that kind of that hypo or depressed response where I might get stuck in, depression or dissociation or even be catatonic if it's really extreme. And it's like, and again, it's not that I don't want to come out of that. It's that I don't have the mechanisms within my system to do that. So the whole, I guess, point of this first phase that I mentioned around safety and stabilization is about how do we help you to feel safe now? Because anytime you're in that state, so if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, the question that I would encourage clients to ask themselves is, okay, where am I not feeling safe? And how can I meet that need right now? So, yeah.
In that way, is therapy, in a sense, and is one of the things that therapy provides, kind of a space to practice that flexible stress response?
Yeah. So it's essentially kind of building tools together, and also, in your life, and even just noticing where you are. So, for example, you've probably heard of the window of tolerance, which is a very popular kind of simple metaphor that we use to describe this process, which is essentially like if we imagine we have our comfort zone or our baseline space where we want to be most of the time, we also have kind of the upper end and the lower end. And it's very normal for us to move throughout that space throughout the day. But as I said sometimes what will happen is we get triggered and we go outside of our window of tolerance, which means it's really hard for us to get back to that kind of optimal middle zone where we want to be. So again, through therapy, what we're looking at is actually how can we sort of slowly build your capacity to oscillate through that space? How can we create safe ways for you to feel angry or safe ways for you to feel sadness? And how can we slowly over time expand that window of tolerance? So make that sort of comfort zone that you have a little bit bigger so that we can cope with stress better. So again, when we have trauma, what we see is that window shrinks. So that's another way of describing it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think what also happens when that window shrinks, in response to that, we have to shrink our world.
Absolutely.
We have to minimize the relationships or the stress from work. We make our world smaller to try and stay in our window of tolerance. And again, there comes that point where people are like, okay, I've made my world as small as I possibly can and I'm still struggling and I'm not able to do the things that I want to do and have the relationships that I want to have. And without this language, they're essentially saying, I need my window of tolerance to be broader so I can actually live the life that I want to live.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the hard thing about it is it's because it's a reactive space, it's very hard to kind of step into deserving. It's very hard to even connect with anything like, what if I deserve something a little bit better than this? Or what if there might be another way for me to go about this? Or what would it look like for me to be gentle with myself? There's often not room for that kind of, thinking or approach. So it can be really hard.
Totally. Yeah. And I think our society is very individualistic. So when we notice that we're not coping in some way or we need help, we generally just locate the problem in ourselves or in our past experience maybe as well. And we feel like and that's where the shame comes in, right? This is something that's wrong with me.
Yeah.
Rather than, and I think one of the things that therapy can also do is contextualize what's happened and what they're experiencing in the wider systems that we live under.
Yep.
That actually this is something that a lot of people are experiencing and it's not just a flaw in you as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, a lot of the beautiful kind of leaders in the trauma world, like Gabor Mate, for example, often talks about a kind of component of the impact of trauma is isolation, is that disconnection from support. And I think it's very, it's almost ironic in a way that these experiences kind of tend to isolate us from the very thing that we're seeking or that we're needing. So, he has this beautiful example that he gives where he talks about things that have happened to people growing up. Like, for example, it might be that there was abuse growing up and he'll often ask the person, who did you tell? And they'll say, I didn't tell anyone. And he's like, there's the trauma. So it's such an important point. Yeah.
And that when we're alone in the trauma and we don't have the person that we can tell that there's not enough safety in the environment, that's when we just internalize and locate it in ourselves and withdraw. And that's the function of shame in a way, is to have us withdraw in order to be safe in a way. And when our environment's not supporting us to reach for support, that we become really isolated and in that place of shame, which makes it really hard to know where to get help or to reach out.
Absolutely. And I think the other key component of particularly complex trauma, which I know we will come to, is we learn that we can't trust ourselves either. And that is a catastrophic thing for somebody to live with because, ultimately there is something innate in all of us that I believe is good and, and curious and kind and compassionate and all of these things. And I think when we learn that for example, we can't trust that or we don't have access to that, I think I've seen time and time again that particularly when there might not be, active supports in that client's life for whatever reason, them being able to go to that place within themselves and heal from there is so profound and so powerful. So when we experience things that undermine that, where you go, you can't trust that, or it's not okay for you to do that or sit with that, that can be really, really damaging.
Yeah. Absolutely. And something that stood out for me a bit earlier as well was the idea that we're finding ways to experience our feelings in a way that we can tolerate. And so it's not about eliminating, if someone's got an anger problem, we're not trying to eliminate anger. If someone's stressed, we're not trying to eliminate stress. Like these are parts of being human that we haven't been able to access in a really integrated way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm mindful, sorry, I've only been on phase 1 so far, but the next part of the therapy we would do is what we call trauma processing. And ultimately, we're kind of always doing that work, right? Even having these conversations, we're tracing threads and we're having understandings and we're whatever. But this particular process is about, okay, you have the resources now. We've got the capacity to almost tolerate some level of distress or tolerate some level of activation or emotion. And now what we're going to do in a way is we're kind of going to go in and almost deliberately activate that memory or that trauma, and we're going to find ways for you to, again, physiologically and emotionally complete and release that experience. And what will happen is it's not going to go away. I'm really clear about that. Like, it's not about, oh, cool, I'm better now, like everything's great, but it's about changing our relationship with that. We can witness it within ourselves rather than identifying with the experience and going, oh my gosh, this makes me a bad person. Does that make sense?
Totally. And that we can observe ourselves. I remember once being in a store, maybe like, it's probably nearly 20 years ago, and I was going through a stressful time and I just started therapy. And I remember being in a shop and I suddenly got really hot and I was breathing really fast and I felt like my heart rate was really up, and I was like, oh my God, what's happening to me? And I felt like because I'd already done a little bit of therapy, thank goodness, I was able to go, interesting. My heart rate's really high. Interesting. I'm breathing fast, and kind of observe what was happening to me rather than just being in the panic and the overwhelm of it. And that was kind of my kind of first moment where I thought, oh, I might have gone into a panic attack there, but because I just had this little bit of knowledge I'd gained and this little bit of understanding and this little bit of trust in myself, actually, that I could observe what was happening and go, oh, I'm really overwhelmed. I'm feeling panicky. Okay, how can I support myself in this moment? And it just pulled me back really gently, really slowly from that experience, rather than my other option was to go, oh my God, why am I breathing so fast? Oh, this is so stressful. I think I'm having a panic attack, and be consumed by it, to be able to observe it and witness it in myself and trust, and at that point I just had this little bit of trust in myself that I might be able to come back from that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that you said that too. It was just that little bit. Like, often it's like, it's just, there's this huge kind of like voice that's saying, oh my gosh, like everything's, but there might just be this tiny little whisper that's going, or possibly, we know where that road leads. We know where it goes. And if we go down there, that's okay. But what if this is an opportunity to just choose to do it a little bit differently? Not because it's not scary, but because we deserve something better.
Yeah.
And that's that's such a beautiful example of that.
And it was like a little bit of access to my prefrontal cortex that I may not have had previously. Like, I just still hadn't completely kind of flipped my lid, and I still had just that little bit of capacity that I'd only just started to develop at that time.
And I think the thing that you said too that was so beautiful is often it's not often actually I would say it's not always the response that's the issue. It's the way we relate to it or the meaning we assign to it. It's the way we judge ourselves for that. Then we feel shame. Then that perpetuates the cycle, and then we're sort of stuck in this loop of reacting and then judging and reacting and then judging. So I think even just that moment, as you said, that pause where it's like, okay, I've got access to this tiny little bit of something here. What would it look like for me to just practice that and not have to get it right, but have a different intention in the way that I'm choosing to relate to myself.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I was to say, the other important part about the trauma processing side of things is, again, with that sort of phase 1, it's all about how do we kind of pull ourselves out of this if it's going to become too much, if it's going to be re-traumatizing and overwhelm us. So again, a beautiful metaphor that's used is you're driving a car, you don't want to hit the accelerator till you know where the brake is. So that's another thing too, is I think a lot of people really want to jump quickly to the like, cool, like let's just like get in there and, you know, like really like activate this really kind of core experience that I've had. And I think even that in itself can be a beautiful invitation for exploration, because it's like, okay, so where does this desperation to fix it come from? And what is it that you're hoping to be different here, or what is it that's not feeling tolerable here? So spending time in that kind of phase of exactly like building those kind of resources is really important. And I've messed that up myself as a therapist. Like, you know, I'm a very proud ADHDer. I like go in gung ho and I'm so excited and passionate, and the client's like, yeah, and we're both like, yeah, and then we're like, oh God, okay, we need to slow this down a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very humbling and beautiful dynamic experience.
And I think one of the things that people can worry about in coming to therapy is, I know what happened to me. I don't want to have to jump back into all of that and leave the therapy sessions feeling in it and feeling really triggered. And I know what it's like when I go there. I don't really want to go there. I think it's a reason that people avoid therapy. It's a reason we don't come to therapy until we're in that critical point of, oh, I really need to do something here. When people have packed away their trauma in the past and are functioning fine, you know, you don't really want to go back near it. And I think one of the things that holds people back from therapy is, yeah, I don't want to have to go and drag all of that out. But I think what you're saying is that in that first phase of creating the resources and the safety, you establish this kind of structure or infrastructure that you're going to go there with them when they've got the capacity to manage it and keep it tolerable and kind of pack themselves back up a little bit.
Totally. Yeah. And I think a big part of it, number one, is just validating that. Like just validating the fact that it is scary. Otherwise everyone would do it. It is really hard. But I think in any therapy, obviously, but particularly in trauma therapy, that's where the therapeutic relationship really comes in. Because, you know, I would really hope that a lot of my beautiful clients would just say to me like, hey, actually, I'm not feeling comfortable with this, or I'm not okay with this, or I'm feeling really scared. What can we do? And just knowing that we're kind of like, we're in it together, and, you know, I have the beautiful privilege of walking beside them through this process. And even that, you know, because often a lot of the trauma we see is relational, even just having that experience of having someone listen to me, or having a sense of being in control, or being able to say, I need to stop now, or whatever it might be, can almost like give the brain new data to sort of challenge that feeling of, oh my goodness, it's so scary, and what happens if blah, 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 and blah, blah. So blah, blah. Yeah.
Totally. And yeah, I think that building the support is so, you know, I think that's the foundation, building their resources and capacity. The thing is with trauma therapy, if you try to jump in before you've laid that groundwork, your system is not really going to allow that to happen. Or if it does, you know, you're going to need to then lay the groundwork to support you.
And I think the thing is too, like people have these beautiful protective mechanisms that have been working for them for a very long time. And I think we forget that they will kick in when we need them to. So for example, it might be we try to do something and a client's very dissociative, or they have a protective part, or this kind of presence that comes in and resists the process, or they might go, I'm really distracted, I need to get up, I need to pee, I need to do all of these different things. And that is their system saying, here's a boundary. And it's just about on that particular day, depending on the safety and the relationship, okay, is this a day where we just pull back and we go, yep, all right, that's fine, we're going to listen to this? Or is this a day where we work with that response or with that part to feel safe and just create a little bit more space? So always slowly, yeah, and working with that response, not against it.
Totally. There's such wisdom in our systems, and that resistance is a really important indicator that we need to establish a little bit more safety, actually.
Yeah.
If I feel like, I can't locate the feeling anymore, I don't really want to go there, there's something in our system that's like, no, not yet. We're not ready yet. Or something else needs to be in place in order for this to feel like a safe and healing process, and that the therapist honouring that is so important.
But that's restorative, right? Like that's healing, like being able to say either to yourself or someone else, I'm not ready yet. And that's okay. That's healing from trauma because that's what hasn't been allowed in the past. So I think it's just, again, about reframing this idea of like, I have to get it right, or it has to look a certain way, or these are it's not linear. Like we're talking about phases, but they're not linear. So it's a beautiful and dynamic experience, and it's fun and it's wild and it's scary, and it's, often there's a lot of roadblocks, and that's okay.
The roadblocks are part of the process of healing, and they are to be honoured and listened to. And and just so I honour the model, the final phase that we talk about is what we call post-traumatic growth and integration, as I mentioned. So it's almost this idea that, okay, yep, this thing's happened to me, and it's now it's a part of who I am. It's an aspect of who I am, and it's something that I've now been able to make conscious, so I can choose the way I'm relating with it. And it's also something that, whilst this was a horrible and horrific experience, I have restored my sense of agency in that I'm now choosing what I want to do with it. So I'm now choosing, what are the things I want to learn from this, or who do I want to be in this, and what do I not want to do anymore? So it's a really kind of cool moment of having conversations about self-actualizing, which again, often people who've been in that survival response for years and years and years haven't had the opportunity to do. So it's kind of, it's really beautiful. So it's actually so lovely getting to that final phase, and the way I work is a different model, but it's the same model, and actually integrating that part into our body, into our nervous system. And one of the ways of thinking about it is that child's self or the self that experienced the trauma we can look after it. The support wasn't there back then, but now, because I've developed this sense of self and this self-trust and this choice and agency in myself, that I can actually tend to my younger self and bring them into my body, into my heart, and that they can actually rest and not stay stuck in that survival state. And I think that's when, in my experience as a client and a therapist, that's when the body can actually relax and let go of the protective responses, and the triggers can not be so present, or ultimately not coming up in the same way, because the original wounded part of us is safe and relaxed.
Absolutely. And I think the beautiful thing about that is it's unconditional. Right. And as I'm sure, I know you practice IFS and beautiful parts work, as do I. But the thing I love about those models is they kind of argue that there is that innate sort of beautiful healing resource within us that actually isn't touched by the circumstances around us, that isn't impacted by the trauma. And it might be that we disconnect from it. It might be that it becomes kind of veiled at times, but it's always there, and it's always something that we can draw on. So I think that is ultimately the thing. And thank you for bringing that up, that is what heals us, or heals me as well in my experience, is going, oh my goodness, I have everything I need within me. And I can't believe that. Like, that's wild to think now. Yeah. But it's so true. So
And one of the things that comes up in that integration stage is like, even though my carers or whoever wasn't there for me then, I'm here for me now. Even though my partner might not be there for me at times, and this pain might come up for me, I can be the one who takes care of what comes up for me myself. I'm not dependent on my partner never missing me or behaving perfectly or never upsetting me. That is going to happen in relationship, but the safety comes from I can be there for me.
Yeah. And it frees other people from the pressure of having to validate us, right? And that doesn't mean we don't deserve validation and support, but it becomes a choice rather than like a have to, rather than I will biologically and intrinsically and viscerally, like, I will die if I don't have this, this rejection is crushing me. It's, oh my gosh, that really hurt. It hurts so much when that person did that. And I should say, I know that I will be okay. Like I know that I can move through this.
That I can experience this pain. And that's the widening of the window, right? We're not eliminating all pain. We're not having therapy so we then have a perfect relationship. We never have to feel anything negative again. It's really broadening that window so that we can feel the full scope of what it is to be human and relational without being thrown out of our window of tolerance into something that happened from the past. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit about what is trauma and what is complex trauma?
Thank you so much for bringing that up because it would probably be great to have that context prior to everything we've just
Maybe should have done
about.
it earlier. But anyway.
Yes. So the definition, I guess, of or the way that PTSD is sort of described in the DSM, it's essentially a presentation that we will see typically after what we call single incident trauma or big T trauma. So examples of that are, a natural disaster, a sexual assault, a car accident. So those things that I guess universally are very traumatic for most people. When we're talking about complex trauma, we're talking about kind of repeated incidents of experiences that are traumatic for us. So again, I love the way that Gabor Mate defines trauma. He says trauma is not what happens to us. It is what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. So something that might be traumatic for me might not necessarily be traumatic for you based on a variety of factors, resilience, resources, all kinds of things. And it's not a good or bad thing. It's just about understanding that the way that we process information is different based on our experience, right? So when we're talking about complex trauma, again, it's these series of experiences that have overwhelmed us. And typically it's relational. So typically it happens, when we're growing up, it happens in our intimate and romantic and, familial relationships. And there's definitely a lot of crossover between what we would expect to see or symptoms we would expect to see with PTSD and complex trauma, but there's also a lot of things that are very specific to complex trauma. So when we're talking about PTSD, we'll often expect to see things like hypervigilance, which is what we've talked about with that very chronic activation or arousal response. We'll see emotional dysregulation often as a result of that. We'll see things like people avoiding things that remind them of the trauma. So, for example, someone's agoraphobic, they're not going outside, they can't leave the house. We'll see things like intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, nightmares, dissociation, derealization, so that feeling like things aren't real, memory loss, getting places and going, I don't know how I got here, zoning out during conversation, finding it hard to pay attention. We'll see things like depression, all of those sorts of things. And importantly, we'll also see physical symptoms, which is a big part of, I think, the trauma conversation that's evolved over the last few years is things like fibromyalgia and chronic illness and autoimmune. Like there's a very strong correlation between those presentations and people who've grown up with trauma, particularly complex trauma. So complex trauma can encapsulate all of those things, but additionally we will see things that tend to be a little bit more to do with the person's understanding of their sense of self. So what we'll often see is kind of things like low self-esteem, an unstable or distorted sense of self, a lot of interpersonal challenges, so mistrust of others or difficulty in relationship. We'll often see what we call insecure attachment styles, which I will explain. And we'll also see things like impulsive or self-destructive behaviour. We might see rapid cycling moods, so lots high highs, low lows. We might see in severe cases, we might see suicidal ideation and self-harm. And something that I wanted to just note too is there's actually a lot of correlation between what you would expect to see in a complex trauma presentation and a diagnosis of BPD, which is very interesting. So often I will have clients who will come in and say, I potentially was diagnosed with this or whatever the case may be. And often once we have treated the trauma, those symptoms or those traits go into remission. So that's something else that's quite interesting, just a fun fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And that there is so much crossover between the symptoms of different diagnoses and taking the time to kind of unpack things is really important rather than just going, oh, I've got this diagnosis, that's who I am.
Yeah. And I think, I think the helpfulness of a diagnosis really depends on the person. So for some people, it's super validating and really helpful. And for other people, they're like, I find it really stigmatizing. I don't identify as that. And I'm just like, cool, whatever works for you. Like, this is your space. This is your room. Like, I want you to feel like you're in control.
Would you say essentially the work is the same, whether they have a diagnosis or they don't? You're looking at a group of symptoms regardless of what the label is, the work that you would do with the person is.
Definitely, yeah. The only thing I would say is if there are like acute mental health concerns or things like that, it would be a discussion around perhaps the appropriateness of therapy at that point in time, given that that person might need to, or we would advise that that person would be experiencing a level of stability before we perhaps go in and then activate things that might cause more distress. So
it's important for clients, it's important for therapists first and foremost, but I think it's helpful for clients to know that a therapist should be checking all of this out in the beginning stages of therapy and making sure there is enough support and enough stability in their internal system, particularly with psychotherapy to be going in. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's where safety is paramount, right? In that, and keeping in mind that safety is dynamic and evolving. So even though, you might do a few sessions with the client, it's going really well, something might change for them either internally or externally. So I think, again, coming back to that relationship, coming back to that check-in around how you're going, how you're feeling, and just slowing it down if we need to. Like, there's absolutely no shame in that, and I think it's really, really important. I just wanted to touch on too, sorry, because I feel like this is a very important distinction and something I'm very passionate about is how we will often see trauma play out with kids. So again, a lot of what I've just talked about we'll see in children, but things that I think can often be misunderstood within service systems particularly is behavioural behavioural presentation. So things like meltdowns or tantrums or dysregulation, things like aggression, use of violence. So children will often reenact the trauma that they've either experienced or been witness to. So, and often I think that can be misunderstood. It's changing, but often it can be kind of pathologized, or the child can be shamed for that rather than perhaps having support to work through that. We'll also see like trouble with boundaries, rules, limits, kids who really struggle with structure and want to push back. Things like memory, attention, focus, learning. And the other key ones is developmental delays. So that's across the board. So that can be like speech, cognition, fine motor skills, social skills, all of it. So it's I guess the reason I want to really hold space for that is that the impacts of what we experience, particularly when we're young, are huge. And I'm just very passionate about children feeling supported in that sense, and us understanding that kids speak to us through what they do, through how they behave, because they often don't have the language to articulate what they're experiencing. So, just kind of being really responsive to that.
Yeah, and helping them, even a child who's not experiencing trauma is learning how to regulate their emotions, learning how to relate to other people. They're going through a developmental process, and kids that are experiencing trauma and trying to go through that developmental process, like that is a huge task.
Massive. Yeah, it's so massive. And I think that's a really good segue into what I mentioned before around the attachment styles. So I guess I would say most of the psychotherapists that I know adhere to what we call attachment theory, which is essentially a theory of development that argues that our sense of self and our sense of safety in the world, and ultimately our development, is determined by kind of the quality and nature of our relationship with our primary caregiver. So it's almost like they are the secure base from which we explore the world. So we go out and we play and we explore, but we always know we can come back, and that they can kind of help us to self-soothe if we need to, keeping in mind that when we're little, we don't have the capacity to do that. Like, we need someone there to help us with that. So the model kind of poses that in an ideal world, we would be, feeling very safe, and we would have a lot of attunement from our parent, and we learn that the world is a safe place and everything's great and amazing, right? In reality, life is really stressful, right? Parents are doing the best they can, and there's economic pressure and marital problems and family violence and, financial stress and housing and raising a child and trying to do 500 million different roles in the day. And I think, first of all, I want to honour that. And
you're really describing my life.
But, ultimately, I guess what we're starting to understand is that's going to impact the parent's capacity to attune to the child. And because children are often very literal and very egocentric, they can't contextualize that experience. So they can't go, mum's maybe just hasn't spent time with me today because she's really busy and she's pushing late at work and she's trying to make sure I'm fed and I'm in bed and all these things. They just go, mum's not there, it must be my fault. And therefore, what I need to do is I need to now compensate for that to try and restore this relationship, because my quote unquote survival is tied to this person. So that's where we start to see those adaptions we were talking about. So those, those learnt behaviors that we adopt that at the time serve us well, in that we might learn to take care of mum. We might learn to make sure she's okay. We might learn to be the really funny one. So we're taking, the focus away from the stress in the parents' relationship. We might start acting out in school, again, to get attention, to divert from what's happening in the family. We might be really high achieving, whatever it might be. But I guess I just wanted to take a minute to honour that and honour those experiences as something that we learned to do because they helped us to survive the situation. And I also want to say too that parents do the absolute best that they can. And whilst this is obviously a very idealistic way of thinking, there's also really beautiful research around the rule of thirds, for example, which is if you're attuning to your child 30% of the time, you're doing an amazing job, and you might spend the other 30% of the time completely disconnected, and the final 30% trying to just get back to that sense of connection. I think it's really important not to ever shame anyone, but just, again, it's that duality of parents are doing amazing work and the best that they can, and kids are feeling some sort of deficit within that relationship.
Yeah. And I think there's always going to be a deficit in that relationship, right? It's necessary and in some ways healthy that, the parent can't do everything and feel everything and process everything for their child. As they get a little bit older, maybe into the toddler years and past that there is some kind of autonomy of the child and them making sense of things themselves and enduring things themselves. And I think I know as a mum, and as a therapist mum, I put so much pressure on myself to be I should be the best parent there ever was. And I thought I might have said this before, but I thought I was going to be so good. I thought I was going to be such a perfect mum. I had never said that to anyone, but I secretly thought it. And it's been a real awakening for me, going, hey, it's actually impossible to be a perfect mum. And then the realization that my child doesn't actually need me to be a perfect mum.
Yeah.
And what would that be anyway? And would I be taking away their struggle and their own development of sense of agency? And so I think most parents carry some sort of shame about the kind of parent that they are.
Of course.
And what's really helped me is knowing that through struggle with my support, my child will be developing resilience, and that it's not that I take away every possible bad experience or that I never yell when I'm frustrated or those kind of things, but that my child feels supported enough to kind of come through that and for it not to be traumatic because the support's there.
Absolutely. And like, thank you so much for clarifying that and for sharing that, because I think that's a really big misconception, is exactly that. It's like, I have to be perfect, or I can't make mistakes, or I can't lose it, or I can't do any of these things. And I think also keeping in mind that parents are doing what they've been taught, right? Parents are modeling the way that they, and often we're trying to challenge that, right? We're trying to go, I'm not going to do what my parents did. But of course there's some sort of ingrained thing around, well, no one taught me how to do this and I'm trying to learn while I've got this little kid that I'm responsible for. Like, it's huge. But I think, the most important thing from working with parents and working with mums is exactly what you said. It's not about getting it right at all. It's about almost modeling what it's like to feel emotions and to make mistakes and fuck things up. Like, that is resilience. Resilience is not, I'm going to protect you from every possible terrible experience. It's, I'm going to show you how to move through adversity and we're going to do it together. And the other thing is that rupture and repair. So when I do make a mistake, when I get angry, when I get upset, I'm just going to check in with you afterwards. Like, and I'll often ask my clients, when they were little and their parents were fighting and, I was like, well, did they ever come in and just say like, hey, I know that was probably really scary. I just wanted to check in and see how you're going, and I wanted to let you know that I love you and it's not your fault. And they were like, no. And I was like, would that have made a difference? And they're like, yes, absolutely it would have. So I think, and also saying that those experiences can also teach us exactly what we want to do differently as parents, right? We go, I remember that growing up and I want to do that differently. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's so beautiful and so sort of de-shaming and destigmatizing.
And I just want to say too, I don't have children, but I'm terrified. Are you kidding me? Like, I'm so scared of having kids. I'm like, I know that I'm going to fuck them up and that's okay. Like, but of course there's shame there and there's fear there. And like, I just think that parents are the most amazing people. And I think that's also something that I don't know, I would want to be mindful of in therapy too. It's just not shaming parents and understanding that they have often had experiences where they have been shamed when they're trying to access help for their kids and for their family. So I think that's also something that is really important to kind of bring into the open and have a conversation about, like, what has been your experience and how can we make this so that it's not that for you now? Yeah.
And that kind of acceptance that our kids are going to suffer. That's part of being human. Our kids are going to experience adversity, sometimes at our hands, or in preventable ways. And I remember sitting in psychotherapy training and we were talking about some of this stuff. And I just felt, I didn't have children at the time, and I just felt that exact fear of like, oh my God. And I put up my hand and I was like, wait, so how do we not fuck our kids up? And the facilitators were like, oh, no, you will.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're fucking ours up right now.
100%.
Like, it's there's not a perfect way to do this, and they are going to have things that they talk about in therapy in the future and that they grow from.
Totally.
And hopefully as parents we can try and avoid some of that complex trauma-inducing experiences. But even if a child is experiencing that, there is help available and change available and hope available.
Totally. And I think it's also that thing of what we were saying at the start, like something that might be traumatic for one person might not be traumatic for another, because it's not because they've had this like perfect experience. It's because they know how to move through the world and deal with things when they happen. And that's not a criticism or a judgment. It's more just understanding that all of us probably need certain resources in order to do that. And there's different ways to go about, kind of enabling that. And, also we kind of talk about a lot of this stuff like it's very concrete and it's very dire, and it's like, oh my goodness, I've screwed up my kids, or I now have this, history of trauma and I'm essentially like destroyed for the rest of my life. And it's like, well, no, actually that's not the case at all. And there's so much amazing research around like our capacity to change and the brain's capacity to change and neuroplasticity and all these things. And we're all doing it together, right? Like we're all just trying to figure our shit out together ultimately.
Totally. And I think we do a better job than our parents just because we have more information available. And, going to therapy has been incredible in terms of what I have been able to integrate and heal in myself that I'm potentially, hopefully, then not passing on to my child. But there will still be things that are coming through the system, as well as all of the love and strength and resilience that you get through your family system that is passed down. But yeah, totally. I feel like all parents who, have any sort of introspection or, are thinking about this stuff, and even just thinking about it.
So stressful.
Totally. But I think it's the fact that they're even thinking about it means that they're doing a really good job, that's kind of part of, what they're considering as parents and kind of trying not to do.
Oh, my God.
Okay, so let's do a little segment of therapy where we completely change our roles here.
Okay.
We are no longer host and guest.
Mm-hmm.
We are client and therapist. I'm just going to switch into that. This is obviously different to a therapy session with you, right? Like we're sitting here. It's not the normal environment. It's different because I'm a therapist as well. And it's different because there's recordings happening as well. So there's a lot of things that we can take into account that are a part of what's happening here that make it not a real therapy session in a sense. But what I'm going to bring is real, and what kind of occurs between us is real. And it can hopefully give people an insight into, just a little blink into what therapy is like. So I'm just going to settle in as a client. And
thank you.
I was thinking on the way here that something I've just been noticing in myself. Well, the main thing I've noticed in myself is that I've been driving lately and suddenly I have to slam on my brakes because the traffic has banked up in front of me. And it just feels like it's happened several times in the last few days, and I'm really curious about that. Am I not paying attention in the way I normally would? And I was thinking I'm probably heightened lately.
Yeah.
And that when you were saying earlier about, when our stress level is up, instead of going from 50 to 100, we go from 100 to 150. It feels like my baseline at the moment is probably a bit high. I'm kind of the main thing that makes me think that is I'm doing things very fast.
Okay.
I'm rushing.
Okay.
Yeah. And sort of trying to cram things in.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've kind of noticed that you're operating a bit faster than you possibly normally would, and you're kind of having moments where you're like, oh, okay, that was a bit of a close call. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Having to slam on the brakes quite literally in the car.
It's an interesting metaphor, isn't it, for life? So I guess if you were to kind of reflect on some of the things that are happening for you at the moment, like what is it that you feel might be contributing to that feeling of, oh, I'm moving really fast. I notice I might be a bit heightened.
There is something in my life that is, I'm on the periphery of, but is quite disruptive.
Okay.
And I feel like systems around me are in a bit of a flux, and things are changing a bit.
Okay.
I'm being a little bit cryptic with that, but there's just a bit going on, I guess, as well as parenting, as well as working. There's just a bit kind of going on in the background.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like you're holding quite a lot.
Yeah.
And wearing a lot of different hats and almost like switching between different roles all the time.
Yeah.
And it honestly sounds like that would be pretty taxing for anyone.
Yeah, it is a lot at the moment. And I feel like my window of tolerance is normally pretty big, but maybe it's a combination of like what's filling the window now is like pushing its limits, or there's a level of stress where my window might have closed in a bit, perhaps.
Okay. So I guess where are you noticing the stress part? Like I know you've kind of touched on there's a situation in your life that you're dealing with, but is there any particular kind of situations where you really notice like, oh, I'm feeling this?
It seems to be just kind of running in the background.
Okay.
But I notice in my body, like a fastness, maybe a reaching for sugar. There's like it's almost like everything's a bit quick. I almost kind of feel it in my eyes as well. Like I'm like looking in a lot of different directions.
A lot of different directions. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm nervous about this because I know you're a parts therapist, but I would love to do a little bit of exploration around that and just even how it's showing up for you today. So what I might do, if you feel comfortable, is just invite you to sort of close your eyes, because I noticed you already have this beautiful kind of connection to your body and this beautiful introspection. So I just want you to take a moment to just turn your attention inwards and to just notice what it is that is present for you today. And I want you to just take your time, but when you feel ready, just share with me what it is that's sort of standing out for you.
This is like a bit abstract and weird, but I almost get the sense, and I feel really sad when I go to say it, I get the sense of like deep in my chest, like a baby crying.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is not what I expected when I went in there.
That's
it's like
okay.
quite,
That's very welcome. Okay. Does it feel like, I guess you said you've got this image of a baby crying. Is it showing up for you in any kind of physical way? Like, are you noticing any sensations with it, any emotions that might be coming along?
Yeah, just like a sadness and aloneness, actually.
Yeah.
I think I feel a bit alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
In that it sounds like you're doing a lot of this on your own and you're holding a lot of things on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So if we were to just, again, take a minute to honour that beautiful part that's come forward to speak with us today, I want you to just take a minute to just notice it again, to just really kind of focus your attention on being with that feeling, if it feels okay. And if it's helpful, I would invite you to just use whatever kind of feels natural. So it might be your breath. It might be that you want to just invite a little bit of gentle movement. And something that I would encourage just to see would be maybe to play around with, some self-touch. And particularly because you mentioned it was in your chest, maybe just play around with bringing your hands to that feeling. And I just want you to notice what it is like to bring that touch to that feeling, to meet that feeling where it is.
It just feels really good to have actually felt it, because I didn't know that was there. And to then, like really allowing it. Because I think I've been doing a lot of things like reaching for the sugar to avoid it and distract myself and to move away from it. So actually just meeting it is soothing.
Yeah. And, all of those things you described, like that avoiding it and that reaching for the sugar and that, pushing it away or avoiding it is a way of just protecting yourself so that you can kind of function, right? Like do the things you need to do. But what I'm noticing is who is then left holding that weight and that pain and that feeling of, just maybe some loneliness too. So I just want you to kind of stay with that. And I just want you to kind of imagine if you were to have a conversation with this part of you. What might you like to say to it?
I feel like saying, I'm here.
Okay, so I want you to just imagine that you're saying to that part, I'm here. I'm here. And as you do that, I want you to notice your hands, notice what it is to actually physically come to hold that part of yourself as you say that. And I want you to share with me how that part responds when you say that.
Yeah, it really has eased. Like there's that baby is not crying, sort of receptive to me. And yeah, I feel like I can hold her.
You can hold her. Okay, so I just want to play around again now. What I want you to do is just keeping your hands on your chest. I want you to kind of cross your arms for me like you have. And I want you to just notice what it is like to hold her. And I'm just going to invite you to do a little bit of slow, gentle tapping left to right.
Like that?
Yep, so just nice and slow. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, beautiful. So just keep doing that and I'll let you know when to pause. But just again, leaning into that feeling of what it is to hold her. Okay, so let's just pause the tapping, take a deep breath in and out. Just going to ask again, what are you noticing now?
Yeah, there's like more openness and joy. Yeah, everything's relaxed.
Yeah,
really relaxed, and yeah, I can feel me holding her. I can feel her being held by me. It's interesting.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're meeting yourself in a way. So you're holding her, but she's also holding you.
It's like, she's being held by me, but I'm also having the experience of being her and being held by me, if that makes sense.
No, it's beautiful. Okay, and you said joy. That was beautiful. So I want you to again just notice that. And we're just going to do one more set of that tapping. So allowing yourself to let go as you are with her. To know that it is safe to let go. And again, just sharing what you're noticing.
Yeah, there's just a real opening and softness and slowness. Yeah, it feels really, I just feel, softer, more relaxed.
And I can see it too. I can see it in your shoulders dropped and just you lean back a little bit. Some of that weight, it was almost like it was sort of sliding off a little bit.
I feel like my body is opened a bit. I felt like my spine was like straightening out or something.
And I wanted to thank you too for bringing that vulnerability. That's huge.
You're welcome.
I can feel that too. I can feel that was. So thank you for sharing that.
No worries. Thanks for guiding me. I appreciate it.
No worries.
If we step back into our other seats and maybe we just have a chat about
yeah, sure.
that and Can you explain a bit about the...
Yeah, so that's actually just the tapping or?
Well, whatever, yeah.
Yep. So that was a little bit of a intuitive combination of a few different things. So I know you're no stranger to the parts work, which we sort of touched on, which is that idea of sort of tuning into that inner landscape. Often we'll start with like a physical sensation or an emotion and sometimes an image, and then sort of looking at how we can ultimately we want to connect with self. But what I noticed was you very beautifully, it seemed you were already kind of in that space and in that energy, and the way you dropped into that process of just connecting with her was beautiful.
I probably should say as well, sometimes there's a process to go through before
Correct.
you do that, right?
Yes,
so
yes. Yep. So normally, yes.
Yeah. Having done lots of therapy, I do have access to that more easily. So it's not that that's going to be like their first session with you.
Absolutely. No. But something that I found too is using some of that somatic stuff can tend to increase the access or make it a little bit more available in that for whatever reason. And like obviously there is a lot of science behind it, but it's just dropping into the body and that visceral experience can help that part to process whatever the affect is that they're holding. And I think because you already kind of identified that belief or that burden, that was already there as well. So it was just a matter of kind of, sitting with that part and allowing her the space to be. And the thing I loved about what you brought to that was we didn't try and fix it. We just went, okay, what would it mean to be with her? And then you reported that, well, actually, even just that, just making it conscious and just witnessing it has allowed me to have a sense of spaciousness that I didn't before, or have a little bit more joy. The other thing with the tapping, so that's a form of what we call bilateral stimulation, which is a part of EMDR. So it's that slow tapping is part of what we call resourcing. So it's a way of actually strengthening positive affect. So, that idea of what are you noticing? And you're like, oh, I'm noticing, that I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed. Okay, stay with that. Let's build on that. What is it to actually feel that? The tapping can kind of just help us to have a foot in the moment, stay, but also lean into that experience without feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, I really liked that because when if I did an exercise about this myself, which I will sometimes do, I might feel that initial kind of ease and stop, but I really liked that we did it again. Not that I haven't done this before, but in my own process, I liked that we did it again and it really consolidated that ease and it brought it forth, more spaciousness, more joy.
Yeah. And I think that's also that step of letting ourselves actually lean in, which again, when you think about experiences of trauma, we're like, yeah, okay, I know that I have joy, but we don't allow ourselves to lean into it because that's scary, right? But I think there's a lot of space in dropping in to feel it. It's that, I keep saying it, but it's like you got to feel it to heal it. So,
we've got to be able to go there once we've got the supports to do so.
Yeah, of course.
And there was something for me in the beginning of that when I saw that image and felt that kind of in my chest of a baby crying. For me, there was like the awareness of the cameras and it sounded like a bit of a weird thing. But I know clients feel that in therapy and they sometimes will get an image or a feeling and either not share it because they think, well, that's not relevant or that's not the answer they want or that's just weird.
Yeah.
But trusting what comes up, that whatever is coming up in a therapy session might be a symbol of something, a metaphor, it might be quite literal, to name that and go with it and share that, to explore it, not sort of censor ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think, that is like ultimately I'm not doing really anything in that process. I'm just you brought that. And, I think the thing that's so beautiful is that, we have that innate capacity to heal. We've got to drive towards that, right? And those associations that we have are just our beautiful intuitive way of working through that process. So it's not about me necessarily doing too much or directing. It's just walking that process in and also noticing, okay, within this context, that image you've brought, that, you know, perhaps there could have been an opportunity to go into that further and to explore that. But again, being mindful of, well, you know, we're in a podcast situation. Laura's got the rest of the day she's got to go about. So maybe now's not the time to unpack that so much, but we might just still, you know, acknowledge it, create it, and build something to sort of help contain that, so that then maybe you might be able to go home and do whatever it is that you, if you feel you need to, still want to do with that part or that feeling.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a perfect example, I think, of also just that judgment around what's called for, you know, today.
Totally.
Yes.
There's something about stress where it's, in some ways it's coming from the outside. Like, I can tell you all of the circumstances, and that's a huge part of it, right? Everything that's externally stressing me. And I can try and change that and contain that. And, you know, we do have to manage our external world. But I think what was beautiful about that was that whatever's happening in my external world is touching on a part of me that needs holding and needs support and needs my attention and comfort and meeting. And that in doing that, I now feel more equipped to handle all of the other stuff that's happening outside. And while I'll still moderate all of that, and it's not that, I just have to heal myself and then I can handle anything, not at all. But when we're in situations where things are happening and we can't change things, how do we be with ourselves, resource ourselves, create the security in here, which I think is what just happened. Because now when I think of all of the things, I'm like, okay, yeah, they're stressful. But it's not up at that level.
And I think the thing that was really beautiful about what you shared was, what I noticed when you were talking was, it was not when you were talking about, I've got all these things I'm juggling and I'm noticing, you know, that there's a lot of stress and blah, blah, blah. When you sort of had that moment of being a bit teary, it was when you said, I'm alone. Yeah. And that's a perfect example of the fact that it's, what if it's, as much as the situation is stressful, what I would argue is it the situation that's causing that, or is it the fact that the situation has triggered a belief that is painful? Yeah. And so that's what I mean. We can work, rather than starting from the outside and working in, we can start with that and work from the inside out. And it's like a ripple effect, because the way that you're then relating to the circumstances changes, because you're going, okay, I see you, I acknowledge it. Yep, I know. That's a favorite of mine. That's a great story that we've got there. But, you know, I trust that I'm enough in this moment, and I allow that, and I can create space for that, and I can consciously choose what I want to do with that.
And I can be with myself in such a, and that, you know, this is available for everyone, and maybe there's some work to do to get there, but I can be with myself in a way that I'm alone gets eased. But then it also, like, now I actually feel more open to reach out and go,
totally,
hey, can we talk? Can we go for a drink, or let's go for a walk, or to seek support, because that I'm alone when I'm not acknowledging it, or when I'm locating the fault just in myself, that makes me withdraw from connection and support.
Yeah. I think it was the fact you were present with it from a place of compassion, right? So that's that self we were talking about. It wasn't that you were judging that part. You were holding it and meeting the need, meeting the emotional need, which was connection and to be held. And now that that's there's a level of safety now for you to go, I can reach out to these people, and even if they're not available or they don't respond the way that I need them to right now, I'm going to be okay. And it's just a choice. It's no longer a reaction.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to say to you, and I don't know if we're getting too deep here, but I just wanted to really validate that particular feeling as a therapist and as a helper, and as, you know, if I think about my own experience as somebody who tends to or can take on that caretaking role, because it means that I don't have to be vulnerable. And I just wanted to really hold space for that, because I think that's something that we can experience a lot in our work is feeling alone and feeling like we can't ask for help because it goes against what's comfortable or feels safe. So I just wanted to thank you for sharing that and for bringing that, because I really resonate with it. And it was a privilege to be with you in that.
Thank you. I really appreciate the space that you held and the exploration. It was really nice. So it's probably time to finish, but I want to just ask you, what gives you hope in the work that you do?
I think it's just moments like we just had where you get to sit with somebody, and ultimately it's always going to be a bit of a parallel process, right? In that we're humans, I'm human, I'm obviously experiencing something alongside the client, and I think it's just those moments of connection and moments of going, oh my gosh, I'm not, we're not alone in this, or, we can do this. And also seeing people just have, I'm going to cry thinking about it, but just like so much courage and do impossible things and be really real when it's impossible. And I think, for me, it's just, I'm not very good at small talk. I'm not very good at like bullshit. I like to talk about what's really going on and be real and challenge and be uncomfortable. And I think just getting to sit in that space every day with people, even though sometimes it's hard, and a lot of the time I feel, my own things around imposter syndrome and being like, what if I'm doing this wrong, or what if it's this, or what if it's that? Like,
am I a shit therapist?
Oh, mate, every day I'm like, oh God, no. But I think, it's just those really felt moments where it's almost like it goes quiet, right? And the ego drops away, and you're just in it, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. You're just kind of like with each other, and I think ultimately it's what we all kind of seek sometimes. So I think people are awesome, and it's a real privilege. So
that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Giorgia. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
If this conversation resonated with you, hit subscribe and click the link below to download the Source app. It's free to get started and helps you find a therapist who truly fits fast.